So bonjour, hi. Even if we're at a distance, I would like to thank you for taking the time to come to participate and be on time. Thank you to be present with us for the second webinar out of a series of three on the conservation planning. I am Raphaël Pichet. I'm with the IDDPNQL for a lead project lead, and this is within the conversation project for the protection of nature. So thank you for Service Canada and Benoit Jobin, who is with us in order to share his expertise with us. So the structure of the webinar today will be similar to the one last week. We have one presenter, we'll have a pause in the middle, and then we'll have a question period at the end. So if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat, but we'll answer to the questions at the end. Also, we will register this webinar to put it available afterwards, and we are building a synthesis file for the additional information that we saw in the first and second webinar, and that will be sent to you shortly also. And so we have this Conservation Center, Laurie and Christelle, who are here with us. Quay, Laurie Leblanc with the IDDPNQL. So I recognize the majority of the faces here with us. So good morning, everybody. Quay Wachia, Christelle Aubé, so support with IDDPNQL with Raphaël. Thank you for being with us. Welcome, everybody. And so during the presentation, there will be some question also appearing on the screen. So as we go along, we'll ask you to answer those questions. And so today, our presenter, you already know him if you were there last week. So Benoit Jobin, specialist in evaluation in environment and climate change Canada for 25 years. His recent works with the evaluation of the dynamic of in Quebec, as well as the development of the conservation plan and habitats for migratory and species at risk. Mr. Jobin is coordinator of the work team with Projet Atlas for the conservation in the St. Lawrence Lowlands that we're going to see today. So Benoit. Well, thank you very much for IDDPNQL for this platform to present our works with especially Raphaël and Nuri and Christelle. Thank you so I'm very happy to be with you this morning to talk about the Atlas projects that we made available. Just to inform you, I'm in Lévis in Quebec, so it's raining. But there's Canada geese that have arrived already, and so spring is at the door in spite of the rain. So we feel that there's hope there. So it's fun to see these migratory birds flying by. So thank you for the invitation. I will share my screen. So in order to present my PowerPoint. So everybody, you can see it. Laurie, you can just say, okay, all right. So today I'm going to present the follow-up of last week. Those who were present, we're talking about the approach of developing conservation plans. A conservation plan is based on the knowledge of localization of the territories of interest for conservation, where we find forests. And we're going to talk about two atlases that were produced in the past years in order to guide our conservation efforts where there's a need in a specific area and natural environment. And so just context here to give you a background why we did these atlases. So we did we built two atlases, one for the St. Lawrence Lowlands and St. Lawrence coastal regions and the estuary, and then we'll make a pause, and then afterwards we'll talk about how we can use the data and what are the conservation strategies that we could develop and orient regarding the conservation of natural habitats. So the atlases were produced with the St. Lawrence Action Plan. This is a federal, joint federal provincial actions that has existed for 30 years, and there's a 5-year plan in order to implement some actions in order to conserve the ecosystem of the St. Lawrence and the different lowlands according to different themes. The projects are impact the conservation of biodiversity and also water quality, but also projects to impact the sustainable use. With the commercial navigation, and so there's three basic themes in the conservation plan, and in conserving biodiversity. There's different. We're talking about ecologically significant environments, also giving tools to the communities that need to support conservation of natural environments of the St. Lawrence. So this is a project for the St. Lawrence. So it's a joint federal provincial act, and there's different partners also with us. And the atlases that were produced, there was two main objectives. The first one is to identify priority sites for conservation of biodiversity in general. And so these are the atlas that were produced. And the second objective is to use the knowledge that was developed in order to support the organizations in the production of their conservation plan or the implementation plan based on the data and the results of the atlas. So first of all, we produce the information and then we share it, we distribute it, use it, and then we develop a conservation plan. A conservation plan is not just an atlas, it's not just a list of interest sites, but it's also all the determination of the actions and the implementations of actions. And so these are the two main objectives of the project, and we're going to start very soon the 5-year plan 2021-26, so to move forward conservation and the implementation of the different actions. One of the strengths of the projects is that the atlases consider the different needs of many organizations, federal, provincial, and the different conservation groups, academic, and also regarding species at risk, migratory birds, protected areas. So different groups. We also wish that the data be considered by the municipal world, the different urbanization plan. And so we wanted to conciliate and join the priorities of different organizations in the determination of the territory to be protected. And then the territory is vast. The St. Lawrence protected area. So when we look at the Outaouais up to Blanc-Sablon for immense territory, so we decided to do two atlas, one for the St. Lawrence Lowlands and one for the Estuary in the Gulf. And so I'll start by presenting to you how we determine the study areas of the St. Lawrence Lowlands, and then I'll go to the second atlas. So the St. Lawrence Lowlands it joins the ecoregion with the southern part of Quebec, where there's more pressure, a lot of agricultural, and so we can see here with the lowlands of St. Lawrence, and we added with the limit of the Coville region, the Covey Hill region. And so this is with the New York State, and there's different salamanders at risk in the area of Covey Hill. And so we added this territory in the atlas, and also we added the medium estuary in order to consider the fish species in upstream of, so it's a vast 32,000 square kilometers, vast territory. We wanted to identify also vast territory. So we have a team. We built a team. So as I said last week, at the beginning of the project, we have a work team in order to identify the different conservation sites and to work on the different species at risk, and to further lowlands, St. Lawrence, myself with Environment Canada, also people from Environment Quebec, and groups of conservation and experts also in conservation and planning, Mrs. Louise Graton, and also we consulted experts, external consultants also at the various stages of the project. For example, an analysis of threats for each one of the ecosystems. So a very diversified team, and I'm talking about the different conservation targets. And so we look at the jargon here, the different language. So what do we want to identify as interest conservation targets? So we have the fine filter, the main major ecosystem types. So we have forested areas, wetlands, open habitats, old fields, shrubland, perennial crops, aquatic environments, and fluvial system. And one of the interests of the atlas is that one of our reflections, we considered also the open habitats and with the territory of interest. We did it at the beginning, an overview of the plans at the south, the conservation plans in the south of Quebec, and most of them targeted the protection of forested areas and wetlands, but not very much the others. So we broadened the different systems to be considered in the atlas. So that's very important. And also for the different types of the ecosystems, there was one person in charge to collate the information and to analyze the data, to share the results, and to redact the reports for each one of the ecosystems. So we had one expert associated to each one of these. I was responsible for the forest, the wetlands, and the open habitats, and also we also gave ourselves some limits in order to limit some spatial areas for the territories of interest, because it's an immense territory, the lowlands. For the forested areas, we considered the non-fragmented or unfragmented. We also had the wetlands, more than 1 hectare. The old fields, they covered more than 5 hectares, and with an interior habitat of more than 50%. It's a little bit complicated, but we wanted to eliminate the linear old fields, and very important locally for the connectivity and biodiversity. So we wanted to identify the old fields that in order to find the birds, and also for the agricultural grasslands, we worked with the different CER topographic complexes at the 5th level, and that shows what is a topographic complex and what are the different grasslands to protect the birds that are in these fields. And we didn't want to identify the fields where there is agriculture, so that we wanted to identify more the landscape that touches impacts these birds. And also with the aquatic environments, we use the aquatic ecological units, and so all the network in Quebec was mapped, and this was our basic unit, the CRHQ, the Quebec Hydrographic Reference Framework. And so these were analysis framework for the Atlas of the Lowlands. And what was the data source in order to do our analysis? So Environment Canada and your partners, we did a detailed mapping of land use in the St. Lawrence Lowlands, a very detailed in vectorial format, so we can play with the different geomatic so these are polygons that can be downloaded. So we had a map of all the St. Lawrence Lowlands that was produced, a mapping which is very detailed and different themes like the forest, agriculture. We also maybe 35 classifications, general classifications, where you can identify the type of forest, the type of wetland, and even we can talk about the basic attributes to give data of the different wetlands. So this was a lot of work. Thank you very much for the team that produced this map. So this is really a database reference for all the analysis of people who are doing geomatics in the St. Lawrence Lowlands. And so we identified what ecosystems on which we wanted to work, what is our information source, and then we have to identify the territory of interest. And so we had an objective of what we want to identify as a territory of interest. We can't identify all the forest. Maybe there's one. Our objective is a selection of priority, a representativeness. what were the 20% best habitat patches, for example, in a wetland. So if we have 100 hectares of forest in the region of Montreal, where are the 20 hectares that are best targeted for conservation? So this is why we gave ourselves a 20% representativeness for all of the ecosystems where there's a value for conservation. And this 20% representativeness, we didn't apply it uniformly for all the lowlands because it's a big territory, and we didn't want to compare also the forests and the maple trees of Montérégie, Outaouais, because they're not the same species. So we mapped or classified the St. Lawrence lowlands in what we call the regional context. It's a classification, ecological classification from Environment Quebec, where each one of the contexts present the different types of soil and slopes in order, even though the polygons are not adjacent to each other, contiguous to each other in order to have more diversity in the lowlands. And we did this for the wetlands and for forests and old fields and aquatic environments. And how do we determine the sites of interest to retain in order to achieve our 20% representativeness objective? We separated our analysis in two main blocks of analysis to identify the targets of interest. The first one is the selection of sites of high conservation importance. So we use in order to determine on the territory the different that we judged had a high value of conservation that we didn't want to miss in the conservation planning, and where we had a proximity of protected areas. There is a presence also of forest ecosystems, exceptional forest ecosystems, also species at risk, fauna, flora and fauna. We use the different database. We retained also the essential habitats at the federal level. So there's a treatment in order to analyze, to target all the habitat polygons that wanted in order to fill the needs. Also, we did the analysis of irreplaceable sites. That's very technical, but we wanted to identify the forest sites that were unique to a certain region. For example, the Chêne Bleu of all. The type of oak, even though there's no species at risk, well, this is a unique, and this was retained in our criteria selection. So we applied our criteria criteria for irreplaceable sites. But if we didn't achieve our 20% of our representativeness, so we went then we went to prioritization mode to prioritize for each one of the polygons that these can be based on the structure of the forest, old forests, the diversity, complexity of wetlands. So different criteria. And then we identified the different habitat polygons that allowed us to fill our objective of representativeness of 20% if it was not achieved during the analysis of criteria. So we did a complementary analysis in order to give us a value of conservation for each one. So here to the left, we see the selection criteria that was used. And so the public and private protected areas, and also there's a list of different conservation of private that are there to consider the different measures that are there for the private protected areas. There's the exceptional forest ecosystems. There are the different criteria that were retained for the different ecosystems. And we retained also the different polygons that were either included in a protected area, partially included in the periphery of it. And so in order to retain these habitats is that if we have an interesting forest, which is in the periphery of a protected area, in order to promote the creation of a buffer zone, and so in order to reduce the pressures that can affect the protected area. For example, Mont Saint-Hilaire, which is in lowlands, where there's a nice forest and surrounded by the culture of. So here's a little question for you. So the question in French and English. So we have to answer both in order to give your answers, please. So Laurie, go ahead and read the question. Yeah, so in English, Quebec now protects 17% of its land use. What percentage of protected areas do you think are found in the BTSL, the St. Lawrence Lowlands? I'll wait a few seconds. Benoit? Okay, I'll share. So you can see the answers here. One person out of two that says they're less than 2% in the protected in the lower lands, and one out of two is between 2 and 5% in the where the answer is 4.3% that the lowlands are protected in the registry of protected areas in Quebec, but the 17%, we achieved it in December. There was a very important at the provincial level to identify the conservation areas, but the ones that were designated are mostly at the northern of Quebec. In the St. Lawrence lowlands, we're not even at 5% of the territory that it's protected. We're in the private, it's 90% in protected areas of conservation, but doesn't mean that there's no actions to be taken in order to conserve the natural habitats. It will be more of sustainable development in the southern part of Quebec. Thank you, Laurie, for sharing this question with the group, with the presentation. Now, I presented the criteria of selection, but there's also some prioritization criteria that allowed us, so each one of the persons in charge of an ecosystem, with the experts, they determine the prioritization criteria. This is based on the data of the mapping of the occupation of the soil, the geomatics, for example, the form of the forest fragments, the contiguity of the forest fragments of a certain territory. So this is based on the geomatics, and also there's different types of treatment in order to give a value of conservation to each. For each one of the polygons of the forest and wetlands and different old fields there's a value of conservation that was calculated based on the criteria of prioritization. Even though it's selected because there's a presence of a species at risk, there's still a value of conservation which is a part integrated to the polygon based on the criteria that were calculated. This is very important because this information can be used by the people who do analysis, spatial analysis with the criteria that were calculated. And so just an overview of the different results of the atlas. Here we have the distribution of the forest fragments that were retained with our selection of criteria. There's more than 6,000 forest fragments in the St. Lawrence lowlands, and 25% of the forest fragments have a value of conservation for those of a species at risk, a protected area, those who have a high level of conservation. There's a lot of the forest fragments who are retained are in the east part of the in the region of Mauricie, South Appalachia, where there's less agriculture, but where there's a lot of forest spaces, but there's still forest fragments in the Montérégie region, so very strong. In the Ottawa region also, this was retained as interest for conservation. For the wetlands, again, there's 5,000 complex that were retained of wetland complex of conservation interest, and we have also some some peat moss land, also some wetlands around the St. Lawrence. There's many species at risk that we find also in the different the Beaupré swamp, marshland, bogland. There's also, we can see Noutaouais. There's also many humid, wet environments because this is where we find a lot of diversity of where there's different species at risk. So their presence, there's a lot of interest in the Ottawa that was retained for conservation.
For the old fields, this is something new that we analyze now. We have never determined the site of interest in the old fields. They do have conservation value, but people usually see old fields as a cultivating grounds, but it's a dynamic ecosystem. There is a natural regeneration and there is a conservation value. And we have done an analysis here in the Lowlands. So we have 200 that came out as interest sites. Many of these old fields are around bigger urban areas like Trois-Rivières, Gatineau, Montréal, Quebec. And many of these old fields are around the urban perimeters. And they might disappear due to urban expansion. Agricultural world and urban worlds will collide. We have seen this happen in the past, so they are at risk of disappearing. So for example, in the Montreal region, many sites have disappeared and we must consider them in our conservation planifications. For the aquatic environment, here we see different places that have been retained essentially according to the waterways. So the natural wildlife and population that we will find around the water areas. And those are the main criteria that has made us identify the specific interest sites of aquatic environment. So around the Montreal area, we did not have mapping that could help us do our analyses. So when we got version 2 of the Atlas in June 2019, this mapping was not done yet, but it has been completed, and this information will be available with all the data for all of the lowlands of the St. Lawrence River. So here we have a picture of the topographic groups. These are the units that we have retained for the agricultural areas or agricultural grasslands. So we have characterized the topographic complexes according to importance of agriculture within each topographic complexes. So we were able to determine in the St. Lawrence lowlands where the most interesting agricultural matrices were located for the species at risks, all the different species. There are many of them. So that enabled us to determine in which agricultural area we would have a greater possibility to preserve these species and these birds. So this is at the lowland, St. Lawrence River lowland area. And this is where we have been able to specify where we want to invest efforts, conservation efforts. So here is the site of interest for each conservation target. So this is a mapping that is a little bit more blurry, but we see many conservation sites of interest. And we have access to spatial data to determine specifically on the ground where are these territories located. So we have a complete image here of the sites of interest, and we have pushed the analysis a little further. We thought, okay, that's good. We have sites of interest here and there, but is there a place where there is a greater concentration of sites of interest? So there could be a very interesting site of interest that regroups different types of lands. And so what we did is geographical analysis so that we could find out the different nodals of interest. With the geomatic tools, we have determined where we could have a diversity of different interest sites. So here in red, you see the areas in red. This is where we could find a forest, a wetland, there is a waterland and marshes. So if we would like to invest efforts in the conservation of diversity in a more global way, we could have access to this information here and specifically focus our efforts on these areas. There are not many, but it's not because there is a multiple nodal or if there is no, if there's not a diversity in some site of interest, it doesn't mean we won't put any efforts in it, but it was just to focus and see where there were the interlapping sites. So here is what we see, what was retained in the St. Lawrence lowlands. So there are other things that need to be taken into account. So what we call this is the fine filter. These are elements, specific elements that are not considered in the greater analysis. So the fine filter elements are illustrated as being sites of interest within the atlas. So some examples for the fine filter, discrete elements of importance. We have Alvers. This is a natural area. It's a dry, open area, very dry, open area that we find essentially in Ottawa and the Pontiac region. There's a little bit in the Montérégie. There are some rocky lands. It's very dry during the summer times. There are many species at risk that are found here. And the chimney swift nesting and roosting sites. So there are about 12 different colonies of species at risk of birds. For example, the bank swallow colony, which is one of the biggest, the Grande Île de Berthier Heronnerie is one of the biggest group of species of bird colonies, and we have different ecosystems in the Sablières where we find different colonies, bank swallows. So these are very specific points that we see in the atlas. And there is everything that has to do with the spawning grounds. And also we have data on exceptional occurrences of plant species. So in the atlas, we also supply maps of the distribution of different types of birds, the nesting sites for birds. We also have the lake sturgeon spawning grounds mapping. So we have data associated with these different ecosystems. So that's about it for the atlas of the St. Lawrence coastal regions. So now I will talk about the estuary and Gulf of St. Lawrence coastal regions. We have talked about the lowlands and now it's the coastal regions. So here it's really, we're falling into a huge territory. On the south shore and the north shore, we have Baie des Chaleurs, Île d'Anticosti, so it's a huge territory. So we have melted down the analysis to the ecological areas. The polygons that we see here show the territories in which we've gone through our studies. We don't have any, we have excluded marine life, and we also excluded Magdalen Islands because there is a lot of work going on there on conservation. They know the threats very well and everything that has to do with the ecosystem. So we haven't done the work for the Magdalen Islands. We already know what has to be done there. So we have focused our efforts elsewhere in the coastal regions of the St. Lawrence River. So same thing, same approach as for the lowlands. We have a conservation targets. What do we want to keep? What is really what are we taking to heart? So in the forest ecological types. Oh, I thought Laurie wanted to say something. Okay, so at the conservation sites of the estuary and Gulf of St. Lawrence coastal regions, we have the forest ecological types, the inland wetlands, and we had a specific focus on the sandy environments, beaches and barachoises, and also coastal marshes. Coastal marshes are very important for conservation. And then for the fine filter elements in the coastal regions of the St. Lawrence River are the bird colonies, eelgrass beds, salmon rivers. That is also a point of interest, of great interest for conservation, and certain significant wildlife elements and significant plant elements. So here is what we have kept in terms of conservation elements in this class, this particular sector. And through the analysis method, similar to the SLL Atlas, we had the selecting and prioritizing habitat patches. We had open standards as well for the ecosystem. So the selection criterion were a little bit different. We have added the salmon rivers. When we had wetlands or forest lands, forested areas, this polygon was retained as being important for conservation. So same approach, we had the selection criterion, the forest ecological type, inland, wetland, coastal marshes, and sandy environments. So here, I'll show you the results quickly for the main ecosystem types. So for the forest ecological types, the dark green areas are the selected zones to be protected or where we found species at risk. For example, the Forillon National Park at the north of Gaspésie, that came up as a very important zone because it is included in the protected area. And in the lighter green areas, those are other zones of prioritization. In red and orange and blue, we have the conservation value. So that has been, that is a list that has been established according to the quality and the interest of conservation. So in red, they have a very high value, but were not selected because, for example, there was no species at risk within that region. So that was helpful to better distribute the different forest ecological types. So an example here for the inland wetlands, we could see that the greater complex of the Anticosti, the region of the lowlands and the north coast. We have great vast areas here that came up and have been selected as zones of interest in this atlas. There's an example for the beaches and sandy marshes, sandy environments that have been retained. So here we have selected areas, but I think this map is not up to date. I think there's just a little mistake, but in the version we'll make available to you, you'll see that there is different areas have been selected in the darker green area. So we also have maps that show the coastal marshes, areas of interest. So basically all of the coastal marshes are important for conservation, but there were indeed a few that needed to be highlighted because there was, for example, species at risk or they were near a protected area. So same approach. All coastal marshes are important to be for conservation, but certain areas have a higher interest in conservation. So we will have 2 survey questions so that Laurie will share with us. Yes. Sorry about the confusion earlier, Benoit. I will launch the survey. So first question, did you know that there is a butterfly species that is endangered, and the only place in the world where this species lives is in the Baie des Chaleurs in Quebec and New Brunswick? Yes or no? And for the second question, did you know that there is a species of butterfly designated as endangered and that the only places in the world? So it's the same question. There is another question at number 3. What is the name of this butterfly species? Perfect. I will share the results. Here are your results, Benoit. Okay. Well, I'm happy to inform you that there is an endangered species of butterfly in Quebec. So 100% of people did not know there was an endangered butterfly in Quebec, but some people have thought it might be the cuivré des marais, the large copper and maritime ringlet, but 38% said that they didn't know. There is only one species of butterfly in the Baie des Chaleurs, and it's this one. This butterfly is found in 2 or 3 marshes in the Baie des Chaleurs, close to the Saint-Omer Barachois. I think that's about it. There was a population before in the Forillon Park, but after analysis, they have realized it was not the same species. So the Fortio des Maritimes is found only in 2 areas in Quebec. Some areas have been targeted and some focus has been put on it for conservation actions. So we find this butterfly in the Baie des Chaleurs. So we don't know all of the endangered species. We have experts that are associated to each species, and that enables us, when we deal with these people, that it's helpful to determine the territories of priority for conservation. So thank you for the question, Laurie. So I will move on. So in the atlas, we supply maps that gives us an overview of these sites of interest. So here is the estuary. These are the areas that have been selected for the bigger ecosystems and the marshlands and the sandy lands. And we also have essential habitats for the belugas. And we can really quickly have an overview of the different zones of interest. So we have the main concentration areas. So we have access to these types of maps for all of the territory. And we also have maps showing us species at risks and vulnerable species in different areas. So this information is not made public. We cannot give these points of observation out. We have to go through the Ministry of Environment, the Provincial Environment Ministry to have access to this data. But we can see in the Anticosti Island that there is a lot of a bigger concentration of birds and that are endangered. So these maps are available, and also did an overview of methodology reports. So I presented the two atlases to you, but this information must be useful. So there's a lot of information that is made available to the population. So efforts have been made in that direction. So when we have created the two atlases, we said this information must be made available. So reports have been produced in the last year, in 2019. It specifies the source of data, the analysis that were done, the descriptive results, and the map appendix for each of the atlases. And we have also all of this information is included in these documents, these reports, and it's available on the Atlas of Sites of Interest for Conservation along the Estuary and Gulf of St. Lawrence coastline website. So if you do research on your web browser and you just type in Atlas, you'll see there is about 10 atlases made available to you. You can click on the atlas for the sites of interest of the St. Lawrence coastline, and so you'll have access to all of the information, the methodology report that I spoke about, spatial data. If you want to have that data, you can go specifically for your zone of interest. About a year and a half ago, we have described for each site of interest the different types of analysis and the methodology that we use, what type of analysis, the results. So if you're interested for the St. Lawrence Lowlands, you can go on their website and go straight to the St. Lawrence Lowlands, and the links are available on the website. If the links don't work, just let me know and I'll try. I've been trying to reorganize the site. So if you really have an interest in getting this data and you see that it doesn't work, just let me know and I will be correcting those links for you. So for each of the Atlas sites, we have geospatial data, metadata, maps, so it's very complete. And speaking of geospatial data, here I have an example here for the Lowlands. We have calculated a series of prioritization criteria and selection criteria. So is there a species, endangered species or species at risk? So all of this data is available to you, to everyone. You can have access to the data, just download it and visualize it, and then come up with your own analysis. So as I said, not all data, basic data is available on the protected areas or the species at risk. They're not publicly available. You need to contact the managers, the people that manage these databases. But this data here is available to everyone. So this is what we wanted to do, to make the data available. Here, if you want to know why is a site selected in the region of Drummondville, for example, you can go in the database and you could see there is a presence of a species at risk or exceptional environment. So you won't necessarily know exactly what species, but you'll know that there is a species at risk that is present in that area. So it's very interesting for conservation. There is another tool that was made available just before Christmas. The results of the two atlases brought this about. We have an interactive map on the Octo. It's on the OGSL tool. So you have the link at the bottom of the image. So if you click on that link, you can have each territory of interest that is shown on your screen, without having to download all of the geospatial data and everything, etc. So if you want to know in your territory where you reside, if there is any zone of interest, you could go directly to this app and find out. So for example, in Montérégie, in Saint-Amable, you could see we have the town of Saint-Amable, but we also know that there are forested areas, wetlands of interest, old fields of interest, aquatic environment of interest. You could see quickly with all the colors here, it shows you exactly where these areas of interest appear. So this is available. A lot of data is available, but with the ongoing project, a lot of information was used to produce these atlases, and that data is also made available to the public so that they can use it for their own analysis. So the mapping of the lowlands and the coastal area of St. Laurent is available on the Canadian government website, and also the Quebec government website. You can go through administrative regions or through other types of regions. So these are huge data files, but if you are specifically interested in, for example, the Kanawaki territory, you could go in the Montérégie sector, and this way you can reduce the number of data for your own analysis purposes. So all other available data, you have the SLL land use mapping, regional depositional contexts, aquatic ecological units, directory of PAs and conservation measures, and the directory of conservation plans. So it's available, made available on all of these websites and on the OGSL website as well. So you have an arrow pointing down to which website you can go to get that particular data. So there was some data done for the territories at the south of Quebec. So you have also some criteria that are shown, what criteria were considered and different analysis. So you can go directly in the conservation plan directory to find this information. So this information was made available to us for our analysis, but they're made available to you as well for your own analysis. So now we are at break. For a second step, I will speak to you more about what you could do with that data, how you can use it, and what it could be used for. I don't know what time it is, Laurie. Yes, Benoit, it's 10:25. Are we within the limits? Yes, we are exactly within the time limits. So we could take about 10 minutes and come back at 10:35. That's good for me. Okay, and then we can take some questions. Great, thank you. Okay, see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start, Benoit, when you want. Okay. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'll try to maybe go a little bit slower. I have so many things to say at the same time, so I'll try to go a little bit slower. Okay, so we did a good overview of the two atlases that were produced and all the data that is available for people to use. The interest of the atlas is to support, supply information to support organizations for the conservation of natural areas. What we want is that people could use this data and integrate it in their urban planning. We see this in the municipal world. They integrate this in their different city planning. Right now, the MRCs of Quebec have to produce regional plans for wetlands and hydric environments. I'll talk about this in a little while, the importance of these plans. People, also the municipalities develop conservation plans of natural environments. So there are many organizations. So this is the goal of this organization, to make it available, and also in the future we want voluntary plans. So the atlas is a data that was produced with experts, but we make it available so that people can download the data and maybe adjust according to your own objectives and needs. So that's very important to consider. The atlas is not it's not the only answer available. It's an analysis to prioritize the conservation of natural habitats, but we don't have an answer for everything. And this will help us also at the government level to determine the different sites to protect for species at risk for the destination of protected areas. There's many people who use the atlas also in their request for funding programs. And also there's different uses, and this is what I'm presenting in the next slides. So here we have the atlas. In the second objective that I presented to you at the beginning is that we want to develop conservation plans also, and to have strategies related to them. And so how can we use the data? Well, this is with the development of the conservation plan according to the approach of management and conservation. Last week we had a presentation on what the open zones, and we had a conservation plan which was done by Conservation de la Nature. So we want to use the data in order to produce conservation plans which are according to the same approach, to identify what we want to protect, to what are the pressures that affect our types of conservation, and to develop also the different theory of changes and the scenario of conservation. So this is a tool of project management that we prioritize in order to give orientation to conservation. And in a strategy of conservation action, especially in the St. Lawrence lowlands, we don't want to protect each territory, because the territory is where we have private areas, and so there's different tools of conservation that exist according to the situation, the specific situation of each sites of interest. For example, here we have a site where there's a value of conservation which is weak, but not very high, and there's a lot of not too much pressure on it, but maybe one tool of awareness will be sufficient in order to ensure that the environment remains integral. But if we have a high value of conservation with different species at risk, protected areas, and that the pipeline is at the door, and we can feel that the environment can be destroyed, then maybe there's an acquisition here aspect that we need to put. There are strategies of conservation that we'll develop. We'll consider the ecological value as well as the threats, and this is how we develop the appropriate tool in order to act on the field. And so the data is available for people to analyze according to their own objectives. And I repeat it again, especially in the south of Quebec, the protection, we don't want to have for each one of the sites. There's three main things. So for example, the protection, the sustainable use, harmonious sustainable development, according to to put together the conservation, the ecological functions, and also the component of restoration that we're hearing more and more. We had a webinar last week with people from private forests of Quebec, and of course we don't want to protect all the forests in the southern Quebec. We still need maple syrup, and we still need some firewood. So there's a way to put sustainable development and different elements of biodiversity together. So this is very important to keep in mind. And also, our analysis was done for the coastal marshes and lowlands, and so there's a very vast territory, and we were able to decide and say, okay, we're going to work on forest fragments who have an area of more than 10 hectares. but it's not because we have a forest fragment of 8 hectares that we did not consider in the analysis. The species at risk in these fragment that we don't consider. It's all the question of scale that comes into play. There exists conservation plans already for certain MRCs and municipalities, and it's not because one site doesn't come out important in the atlas, it's not important locally and regionally. So this also is very important to retain. Also the element of connectivity. There's microsites a little bit everywhere in the landscape, which maybe don't have an interest for conservation per se, but which is very important in an ecological network, which is part of the connectivity in a specific territory. So these are elements that we consider more and more. So the importance of scale. But the atlas is not a solution for everything. It's a tool. And then also that because we have data available for people, this allows us to visualize the results. They can download the geospatial data and the geomatics software in order to see very precise. I shared about Octo, the software on their site. But if you have an interest to develop a conservation plan for your community, the data of the atlas can be used as a basic entry level, and to see the criteria that were retained for prioritization, and then you can modulate and modify along the way, and the prioritization according to your own objectives. So this is what people do more and more. And the last question on the questionnaire. Yes, I'm sharing right away. So the question: Have you access to do you have access to geomatic software, ArcGIS, QGIS, and other to download any and analyze atlas data? Yes or no? So I'll show the results. So there we are. Very interesting. 86% have an access to a geomatics software, and it's good because the data exists, and we can visualize the maps. We can visualize the data on Octo. And if people wish to go more in depth in the analysis for the planning of conservation, now geomatics is an essential tool for this. We cannot. This is irreplaceable. We need it, and we can't have a geomatics team in each one of the communities. So we can use to make use of consultants and contractors. Now, most of a conservation organization or municipal organization, somebody who can use a geomatic software, I think it's even free. So there's a way to have training also how to use it and how to use the data in order to download the data, the results of the atlas, and then use the data according to your needs. But I can see that most people have access already to these tools, and that's good for them. And we invite you to download the data now and to mix them up and look at what we did, the criteria that we retained. And if you have any questions, you can contact me and we'll work together. So some examples of the use of the atlas, how it's used. And so I present here what we call the pan-Canadian approach for the recovery of species at risk in Canada. So Environment Canada and the Service Canadien de la Faune, they took an approach of concentrating their efforts of conservation and of species at risk in different priority areas. So each one of the provinces has determined one or two regions with Environment Canada and partners where they concentrate their efforts of conservation. And here in Quebec, well, the priority region that was retained for species at risk is the lowlands of the St. Lawrence. And that's good because we have an atlas for this where we can see all the different areas of interest for species at risk and interest for conservation. We're working right now with different partners in order to develop some conservation plans of species at risks. And here we can see the approach that we did is for the lowlands of St. Lawrence. It's a vast territory. And so we're right now we already produced some conservation plans according to the open standards of conservation with Conservation Nature of Canada. For the Ottawa region, we have different chains of results, like we presented last week. Same thing for the region, the center of Quebec, with the Centre d'Environnement du Québec, in order to determine some multi-targets, like I said a while ago. And for the area around Montreal, we also an action plan in order to for essential habitats. Or for species at risk in the metropolitan area of Montreal, we determined the different action measures also for this region. And so we have regional action plans that cover most of the territory, and we work also with the municipal world and the private forest in order to develop conservation plans for species at risk and for all of the territory. And more nature, the conservation plans that we developed with Nature Conservancy of Canada. And so in their conservation plan, they took the data of the St. Lawrence, the SSL Atlas, and they have a good ecosystem, wetlands with a different, they took their criteria of prioritization and they make their own prioritization, which are more targeted according to their own priorities. And so they took the data of the Atlas, they mixed up the data according to their own needs, and they developed a conservation plan on which they use with the experts in order to analyze this data and the priority areas and the different. For an example here where the data was used, we can see here we have it for the Manicouagan Peninsula for the different where they use the data of the Atlas. So that's very interesting. Another example also at the municipal level, Drummondville, they developed a conservation plan for natural habitats on their territory. And they based their analysis on the data of the Atlas, and the same thing as was done with Nature Conservancy of Canada and others. And they selected some criteria and adjusted some, and according to their own objectives. And we're talking about a scale. We talked about the analysis of the data for the lowlands, and here Drummondville is just a specific area. So they adjusted the analysis of the data of the Atlas according to their own objectives, and they added some criterias also, and they used the basis of the information, and then they adjusted according to their analysis, according to their own needs. And so this is what we want people to do, to take ownership of the data and to use it according to their needs. We can see it for Drummondville. We can see also for all the MRCs, but the Arthabasca also. There's MRCs of the center of Chaudière-Appalaches where they use the data of Atlas to produce conservation plans of their natural habitats. And so this is very nice to see that people are using it, and they use the tool that was developed to determine their own conservation plans with this data. Another on the regional plans for wetlands and hydric environments, which was adopted by Quebec in 2017. And this act, there's an obligation for each one of their MRCs to produce what we call a regional plan for wetlands and hydric environments, where they have to identify the wetlands and hydric environments, which are interest for conservation. We call it in French PRMHH. And so this was produced for June 2022. So in 1 year, these documents must be produced. And so I have a lot of information that tells me that the majority of the MRCs are using the Atlas, the data of the Atlas as an entry level, or at least they will consider it. Will they use it per se? Well, it depends on their needs and their prioritization and their spatial scale. But I have a lot of information that tells me a lot of MRCs are using the data of the Atlas, well, at least the MRCs which are located in the lowlands of the St. Lawrence. And there's also a lot of MRCs and regroupments of MRCs more than the requirements of the region, the wetlands and hydric environments. Yes, they will do a conservation plan, but they will also add the forest, the different open lands and old fields in their planning. So this is a big step forward. There's an obligation to do a regional plan for the wetlands and hydric environments, but certain environments go over that, further than that, they will add the forests. And so we're talking about a regional plans for wetlands and hydric environments with an N added at the end, natural. So it's good to see that they're using the data of the Atlas. There's also some data used for academic purposes. There are many researchers that are using, since the geomatic data is available, well, there's many universities, they have programs in geomatics, in forestry, in biology, in geography, who need geomatics data in their exercises, and so they do that in Université Laval, Sherbrooke, Outaouais. They use the data of the atlas in order to teach their students how to use the data geomatics in their teaching, and this produces reports like this, where we have the forêt seigneurial de l'Obtinière in the lowlands of St. Lawrence, or where we have fine scale analysis in order to characterize within this forest fragments the different zones of interest and the different forests and wetlands, and so this is very. We have 4 ecosystems. Well, they went even more. We saw 4 ecosystems, and here they go even in more detail. So, in order to give orientation, maybe to have a conservation plan more to their own scale. So this is a practical application of the atlas. And also there's works in parallel to the production of the atlas with the ecological connectivity. It's good to determine protected areas, but these targets have to be maintained. We need an ecological network, a certain collectivity to the different displacement movement between the flora, the forests, and so people from the University of McGill, they produce an ecological connectivity according to the terrestrial, in order to identify the main corridors in the south of Quebec. And there's analysis right now in order to superimpose the data of Atlas with the ecological connectivity network in order to identify if there's a forest that is more important for the conservation of the biodiversity as well as the connectivity. So this area shows good interest for the connectivity, and so there's a value of conservation which is added to the atlas, and we'll update the atlas also. We want to enhance the atlas, so we're going to add all these the considerations of connectivity in the next versions. And then there's more and more. What we see is that people who are doing requests of funding with different funding programs, they say, okay, yes, I have a project of conservation in my backyard, and so in my territory, and so I'm going to apply at the PIH or the Fondation de la Fonde, and in the different requests of funding. Well, this is oh, by the way, we have the SSL Atlas, so we want to conserve this area. So it gives a lot of arguments for discussion to put in their request of funding, and so this is also one of the objectives that we had when we produced the atlases, and we can see that this is a good tool for that. That's very good for that. And the method that was developed with the SSL Atlas is exportable also. In function of the data that are available, we developed the method in the SSL with a very precise mapping, and we applied it for the coastal areas also. We didn't have the same level of division and occupation of the soil and the distribution of the ecosystem, but we took the data that exists, the existing data, and adjusted it according to the analysis that we had. We know that this was done with the center of Quebec region, but there's a portion of this in Chaudière-Appalaches where we didn't have a mapping of the occupation of the soil, which was as precise as the lowlands, but they modified their analysis in order to do the Appalachian region. And the Conservancy of Canada, they're developing an atlas for the Laurentides. And so it's a bit the same recipe applied for the lowlands, applied for all the natural Southern Laurentians conservation plan. And so the method that was used in the lowlands is applied to Southern Laurentians with the data that we have. So it's a very different, we're dealing more with forests, and so the priorities will change, but we can see that the main recipe can be applied. So here I finished my presentation. Many people who produced this atlas. A lot of logos are present here, and we're really in implementation mode. And we will have other logos that will be added in the coming years. But it's important to thank all these people, and I'll go in all the details with the names. A lot of people gravitated around this project, so I was very happy to share these information with you. And so I'm available for, I don't know what time it is, 11 o'clock. Yes, we have a lot of time for questions. Perfect, Benoit. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. And so we'll start taking questions, and you can write it in the chat also if you prefer, or open your camera if the hand doesn't raise, if you don't raise your hand, or use the chat. Well, we have a chat. Well, maybe it's not, there's something regarding birds. It's not related, but then I'll go ahead. Yes, thank you, Mr. Jobin. I have a question. I don't know, for not a specialist of conservation, but when it's time to acquire some private lands and interesting sites, which are, for example, in the sectors more upstream of great value of the St. Lawrence, I'm just wondering if or there's an organization would not have interest to call the patches of less value, but to buy more, so that in 5 years or 100 years, we would promote or favor. I don't know if there's any strategies towards this. I imagine it's maybe a political suicide to buy parcels that don't have no values, or patches that don't have no value. But this is the sense of my question. Well, I talked about this a while ago, that in the lowlands, we're in private lands in the region of Montreal, essentially. I think it's $40,000 hectare, so we cannot think of buying these areas. These are to become public. Certain types need to be protected also, because there's a lot of pressure. Some organizations of conservation in the region of Montreal and elsewhere where they buy these patches because there's a need of conservation. They buy it at a high price, but to acquire less areas of less ecological area, it's an option, I imagine. It's a bit like what the matrix I was talking about, the different ecological value and the different tools to use, maybe not to protect equally the great territories, but to make a sustainable development of planning and to work with people to which who are landowners, so there's a way to maintain this ecosystem and to promote also the sustainable development of these areas. But as I said, as they're saying, is it a political suicide? It could be, but I never asked myself that question. We'll see.
You'll
it
also see it
with
the connectivity analysis, the degraded areas. Maybe we'll say we have to maintain that area, even if it has been degraded, because it does participate to connectivity in the local area. And it's very important. And people say, hey, what is that? That's old fields, but it's in a specific location where we cannot let it go. So those will be highlighted in the further analysis that we'll do. Yes, you're right. Indeed, with the connectivity that is being more and more known and considered now. I was wondering, sorry, other people had raised their hands. I'll raise my hand first. Yes, Linda, I'm not sure if you had raised your hand first before David.
I'm not sure actually, but just a quick question about connectivity actually. We just carried out an analysis of connectivity on our entire traditional territory, which is quite large. Sorry, I'm from Kitigan-Zibi. And what we're noticing, like everything like you're saying, GIS, it's a great tool, but it's the interpretation that's the challenging. So we found areas that we need to protect for connectivity, and then there was black spots. That's how our coloration, where there was basically no connectivity. So just a quick question, do we focus on protecting the areas that have good connectivity, or do we focus on trying to increase the connectivity corridors in the areas where there's none? That's like, because it's two different, views basically to address it.
Well, I would say that like it's a network. So you have nodes and you have those corridors. So those nodes may be critical for biodiversity and connectivity, and you need to conserve. I won't use the word protect. You need to conserve them, make sure that they're still in there. And if there's gaps between the nodes and there's corridor where the connectivity is not good, let's say, then we're talking about restoration probably, or just letting the nature grow and the succession go. But restoration is will be more and more important in coming years, especially in the lowlands where there's cornfields in between natural areas. So is the forest more important than the corridor? I don't know. It's a network that needs to be functional. So we might protect nodes and finally realize in 50 years that the population has disappeared because there was no genetic exchanges, because there was no corridor. So it's a new way of thinking about conservation now, and more we're talking about climate change and species will move northward. Yeah. And we need to have functional corridors. So these are all not new concepts, but their application is fairly new, and those are really good questions. And I had a discussion with a professor at Université du Québec in Outaouais last week, and those connectivity models are models. And just like the Atlas, we're trying to determine sites, but before going into any acquisition or whatever, you need to go out in the field and do some validation. And there were some corridors that were mapped for a certain species of bird. And when you go out in the field and you look at those birds, well, they're not using the corridors that were mapped on a computer. So those birds, they know where to go. And it's not the computer that tells them how to use the landscape. So,
well, actually, I don't know if it's the same, because the person we had carry it out was a professor from the Outaouais. So maybe it's the same one we're talking about. Yeah. And that was the main thing she was saying, is that we'll be focusing on field verification now. Like, we have the model of where the corridors are and the habitat, and we did 4 species. We did wood turtle, I forget the name of the bird. It's an old growth bird, moose, and martin. But we need to actually go and verify, are they actually using the sites that we've identified? So that's going to be the next step. So
that's interesting, because that's what we're missing is validation, like empirical data to validate those corridors. And that's very interesting what you're saying, that we're going to go out and validate that.
Thank you.
David, you can go ahead. We can't hear you. Oh, yes, I was wondering if certain municipalities or RCMs, I don't know if I missed a little part of your perspective, because I had to intervene here back home. I don't know if some MRCs have already integrated in their plan, their territorial plan, if they have already integrated certain parts or full parts of these conservation plans that are made available. I don't know if you've had done a tour of the different MRCs to maybe advertise, or if the government has taken that upon them to do that. I know for the lowlands, St. Laurent lowlands, they've done it, but for other places, for the forest areas and the fields, as you were speaking of earlier, because here we are embarking in this type of process, but at some point, the little communities like us will have or will need the support from the RCMs eventually. So to have an impact and to have influence, at some point, this needs to be integrated into a plan and be accepted at the political level. Yeah, well, the data from the Atlas, maybe you weren't there while I presented this at the beginning of the second part of the presentation, but a lot of MRCs or RCMs are using the data from the Atlases for their own conservation plans, for the elaboration of their own conservation plans. The data is available. You can have access to it on the GIS or other websites. So they have used the data according to their own priorities. So yes, it is being done. Many municipalities and RCMs are using the data for the hydrological areas and forested areas. So we have questions. Many people are using the data. So to develop a conservation plan for the Drummondville municipality is one thing, but to develop other plans in a layout environment, that's something else. So many places are at that point now. They want to consider the natural environments as values within their territories. So to do a conservation plan is one thing, but to integrate it on a territory is another thing. So that's where we're at now in this process, and we are considering this more and more. So if you are interested in your territory to develop a conservation plan with the Atlas data, well, of course, you won't be the first to do that, and you'll have plenty of support. Yeah, that's true. With the new wetlands, they need to integrate that in their plans, and they need to work with the data, with this prioritization of wetlands and with the mapping. And some municipalities feel it's hard to do, like here in Lac Saint-Jean, 95% of our territory is on wetlands, if you may, at different levels, but so we all have all that to consider and negotiate. We are currently working with the other municipalities with their conservation objectives and goals, and we will merge and work jointly. Yes, of course, in Lac Saint-Jean, there is no atlas as there is for the lowlands, but the recipe will, of course, not be the same in all areas. And wetlands, I think, is for private lands, not for public lands. But the ecological reality that you are witnessing is the same even in Abitibi or everywhere where there is wetland. So yes, we have rare cases around the lake. There is one great wetland and they're exploiting it. They're currently exploiting that area. So they are going up at the north of the lake, and they have their way of exploiting it. What do they have? Blueberry fields? Is it blueberry fields or cranberry fields? It's really Torb. It's a huge owner. It's Pete Moss. He wants us to say yes. He's working hard to negotiate. We've been opposing for 10 years now, but every year he comes back full on, head on to get our approval so that he can exploit Pete. Thank you, David. Dorothy, you wrote a really nice message in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to express yourself more live. So she said, thank you for the data. It's very easy to upload and it will be very useful. So Eric, I'm going to give the floor to you. No, actually, no. Oh, because you just turned on your camera. I thought you wanted to speak. Well, anyway, I always have 5 or 6 questions as a backup in my head. So I'll just go ahead and ask one. So I really liked the fact that you have insisted that the use of these tools is an appropriation by municipalities and by local organizations and First Nations communities and all of that. But I still see a gap between having that data and also asking ourselves the right questions on how to use that data, and then get the information available on the platform, and then go about the necessary analysis for the prioritization, criteria selection, and all of that. But in a more simple point of view or perspective, what would be the type of support that could be supplied to kind of give us a framework with these different practices, because there are different ways of doing things between municipalities or communities or RCMs. Well, I know that for the hydroecological and wetland plans, each RCM has the obligation to have a plan. So in the Quebec region and Chaudière-Appalaches, all of the RCMs are regrouped together. They have joined their efforts to provide expertise. I think it's 8 or 9 RCMs that are working jointly to elaborate a plan or draft a plan. In Montérégie, it's the same. It's about 5 or 6 municipalities working together. So there is a regional thought process, but it all trickles down at the municipal level as well. They are sharing a lot between amongst themselves. So for diversification and conservation, I have spoken about the open standards on conservation, but there is an expert network also that is being put into place. They are using data for the territories of interest, and they're developing conservation plans. So this is very real for people where they can really share information. There is a data sharing platform, so that is an important support as well. Okay, great. Thank you. Benoit, the practical committee that you have spoken of, do you have more details on that expert network? Is there a website or a name? It's on the Open Standards site. There is a tab for people that have been trained as a coach for the open standards or to teach open standards. In Quebec, we are not, we are very few. We have presented one part of that, and on that open standards site you can see all of the coaches that have been trained all across the globe, worldwide, and there are a few in Quebec and Canada as well. Oh, great. Well, thank you. Yes, indeed, we could include that because we're preparing a plan for you with all websites and data that you can have access to. So for the planification of conservation, so we will also add that link for the network of experts so that it can help you. Do we have any other questions or comments, experiences? Well, I'm here. You will have access to my email address. If you have any questions, write to me, call me. If you download the data and it's not working, just call me and I'll make sure it works. Okay, Donald, go ahead. Yes, me again. It's just that your presentation really brought me to think for the Canadian Coastline Guards, for these environmental questions in case there is a petroleum leak. One of their strategies is to take a oil mass and confine it inside a bay. They will call it a sacrifice bay. And they have already asked us to identify sectors of interest that should not become this type of bay. So I was wondering if the Coastal Guard were aware of this process. We've gone through so much effort to reach out to everyone that could potentially use these areas, because this concept of a sacrifice pool is like you're telling me we throw in all our waste and our oil in there and we sacrifice that pool in that area. Well, it's basically to confine the waste and the perspective of cleaning it up. We, of course, do not wish for that to happen, but it would be a sacrifice. It's not that we sacrifice the pool or the bay. We just confine that area and then we proceed to clean up within that area. So I think it would be good to make them aware of the areas that may be of conservation interests or more delicate. That is a good point. I'll look into that and see if we have contacted them before. At the provincial level, the Ministry of Environment, there's also a working group that is called the Management of Maritime Hazard or Maritime Accidents. So they do integrate the classification of coastlines. I guess they are communicating with the Coast Guard, but anyways, that is a good point. I'll make sure they are. Yeah, it's weird because a oil spill that comes from the land and then goes down to the water is under provincial responsibility, but an oil spill that is originated in the water is under federal responsibility. Sometimes and often they will collaborate amongst themselves, but in the end, the responsibility principles are still there and effective, and they need to communicate. Okay, so I'll make a note of that. And it's already making me think of something else. Great, thank you. The Coastal Guards, their name is Environmental Intervention. It's one of their divisions. Okay, great. Thank you, Donald, for that intervention. We have a question from a colleague from the IDDPNQL. So for a Atlas projection, do you think you will include data on interest, landscape interest? So that was a question that was brought up. I don't know if you want to bring any precisions. Well, a definition for a landscape, I have so many different definitions. It's probably wonderful landscapes. So of course, in the update of the Atlas, we want to put some relevant information, species at risk, eventual corridors. We also had some in the Gulf estuary analysis. I think it was last year we had, or last year we had the regional workshops. We have invited First Nations communities to participate. So all relevant information will be considered in the update of the Atlas. The notion of landscape, we look at that, we touch upon that a little bit with the bird view. We have also the magnified landscape that is being at Environmental Canada. So the maintenance of natural elements. So that could be a tool as well. Of course, it's a tool for landscapes. Are we speaking of visual landscape with no protecting interests, or not axed or not focused upon conservation? Maybe that would be another element to consider, but the main goal of the elaboration of the atlases did not include that originally. But at Montreal, there is a team working on this notion of landscape. It's not something that I master greatly. Excellent, thank you. So in the same line of thought, for the Pan-Canadian approach, where they have focused more on the lowlands of St. Lawrence, will we see eventually projects that will be concretized for the estuary and the Gulf? Well, that would surprise me. That is a decision that must be made at the national level. They need to figure out their financial resources. There was a concentration, an important concentration of species at risk, but in the estuary and the Gulf, the species at risk are in the Magdalene Islands, and they do have funding, 4-year funding for the designated priority areas in the First Nation communities. And also where I work, other 2 regions in Quebec, they have good funding for the species at risk. We have the Green Mountains and the Estuary area, and also the Magdalene Island. So that's a decision that was made to concentrate their efforts, but in the St. Lawrence Lowlands, we have funding that has enabled us to work more in the Quebec region. And following the Atlas publication, we already had some mandates to work on invading species for the voluntary conservation in the Quebec region. Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? If not, as Benoit has mentioned, do not hesitate to contact him. If you have any other questions that come to mind, you can also contact us for support on your planning process. It'll be a pleasure for us to answer. So I'll leave the floor to Raphael so she may conclude. Benoit, yes? Oh, actually, there was a question. Will the geese come earlier this year? And ducks come this year? Well, from what I know, if the snow remains on the fields, they usually do not go up north, but now the snow is melting, so they may come earlier. But in general, with climate changes, we are noting some changes in dates, especially for the goose. If we look at data over the last 50 years, they are flying in a few days earlier than usual because spring is coming up early with climate changes. Maybe the goose and the and ducks will go up north a little earlier. So that was just for David. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, here in the fields, we already see them in Lac Saint-Jean, and the lake is pretty black of goose. So I don't know if we're going to see any records this year. The lake has melted on the 14th of April. That was our record, and now it seems like it's melting. So now we only have 20 inches of ice rather than 3 feet or 5 feet, as we usually see. So this is question from a hunter, and I do love to see the birds come in too. It's fun to wake up early, but now with the confinement, I can't wait to see what's going to happen. Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Raphael. Perfect. So we will conclude. We are ahead on our time, so do not hesitate if you have any other questions. As Laurie has mentioned, you can write to us. Even if you do have suggestions to improve the webinar, there will be a survey at the end of the 3 webinars. We also had a technical issue at the last webinar for the English recording. So the English recording will not be available. I'm really sorry about that, but the PowerPoint will still be made available for you. So that's it. It's the end of our webinar today. So on that note, I would like to warmly thank Benoit for his presentation. Once again, we have learned greatly. Thank you to both of our translators, Caroline and François. Their work is very important for all. And thank you to my colleagues, Christelle, Maite, and Laurie. You are the best organizers and recorders of the IDD. So thank you very much to you for being here today. All of you participants, we are doing these webinars for you. I would like to highlight the financial contribution of Environment and Climate Change Canada. And on this, it will be a pleasure to see you at the next webinar. Thank you, Raphael, for organizing all of this. She really is at the head of all of this. So enjoy your Easter Sunday. Bye.